Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 301 of Humanity Rising. One of our consistent themes over the last 300 sessions or so is the importance of standing with power in community, also as individuals, as the world turns as it has with the pandemic and political, economic, ecological turbulence. We've emphasized the importance of facing reality with ruthless realism and deepening our commitment as a community in terms of how we work together as we envision a more abundant, more resilient, more healthy, and more naturally, ecologically aligned world. It's very important that we understand that if humanity is to rise, we can't look to our governments, we can't look to the corporations, we can't look to our institutions. They are almost universally either unwilling or unable to take the leadership that we need on even the most fundamental issues having to do with public health, climate change, species extinction, biodiversity loss, social equity, racial equity. So we're at one of those extraordinary moments in history where we, the people, need to rise in our own power. And that's what we're going to be discussing today through the prism of the incarceration system in the United States that has put more people per capita in prison than any other country in the world and possibly any other country in history. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to talk with a woman who stood with power to illuminate the corruption and toxicity of the prison system in her local area. Before we do that, let us pause as we always do and just take a moment or two, center yourself in your body, take a breath, close your eyes, and attune yourself to your heart. Listen to your heartbeat just for a moment. In a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive. We're capable of exercising power at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to introduce Joy Gilfillan, who has been part of the Humanity Rising community for some time. She is an activist in Bellingham, Washington, where she's been a life coach for many decades and an observer of human attitudes and behavior. She has been active in people's empowerment in her local area through the Restorative Community Coalition that she organized with a number of others to stop a massive prison complex from being built in her area. She's a woman of great courage who has run for office, challenged the local sheriff, organized successfully against the prison complex. And through her intimacy, I would say, with the human personality coming out of years and years of life coaching, but also as an activist who's dedicated her energy and her time and her life purpose to illuminate the corruption and the toxicity around the way that in the United States in particular, but I would say worldwide, we dehumanize people through the incarceration system. So she's going to be contemplating for us today how we stand up with power. And in this particular case, how we stand up against the prison industrial complex. So Joy, welcome to Humanity Rising. And I'll turn the program over to you. She has a PowerPoint that she will lead us through, and then I'll circle back and we'll have a dialogue. Any questions or comments that any of you want to make, please put them in the chat and we'll include them in the dialogue after Joy's presentation. Welcome, Joy.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really, truly delighted. The topic today is standing up with power. Can you see my video?
Not the video.
Not yet.
We see you on the screen.
But you can't see me yet. Just a minute. I'm going to share my screen.
No, we can see you. We haven't seen your PowerPoint yet, Joy.
Yep. Cannot start screen sharing while the other participant is sharing.
I just took care of that.
Okay. Can you see it?
Not yet. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, good.
There we go.
Okay, and it's all correct? That's the whole thing on the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So my topic today is standing up with power, and it's about moving beyond following leaders who outrank, dominate, dehumanize, traumatize, or criminalize for profit. And that looks very intellectual, but the bottom line of it is that we have built the most dominative country in the world based on freedom. And instead of selling freedom, we're actually selling the taking away of freedom in the business community and the commodities markets in the international commerce. I mean, it's incredible when I finally got to the bottom of understanding what is the matter with our country. What is the matter with our markets? What is the matter with, how are we managing to mess up the world when we are such a brilliant human species? Now, when I was born, I didn't believe that. I thought humans were pretty odd. Individually, we were amazing, but I was watching, all of these things that were developing over my childhood as we went from Vietnam to assassinating presidents to, wars, continual wars and violence. And I'm going, what is the matter with the human species when we become civilized? Before that, on the farm with the people that I was working with, they were quite amazing. So this conversation today is going to be both a high level 30,000 foot view conversation, and it's also going to be a very human, very real conversation about what can we do ourselves individually to make a difference in the world. Because it doesn't really matter what those guys out there are doing. We can't change it anyway, and fretting about it isn't going to help. And I did learn that on the farm, is that if we can hold our own emotions stable, we can do amazing things. But if we lose track of our emotions and we get caught in the mythology of all the danger that's out there, we can actually get bucked off our horse. We can fall down into a canyon. We can do all kinds of crazy things because we're not paying attention to where we are. And one of the things that I really admire and appreciate about Humanity Rising for the period of time I've been listening is that you all are talking about real life, humans. It's about humans. Us humans are the ones that created these problems in the last 50 to 100 years, 200 years, 300, 400 years maybe. But really, it's our generation that's sitting here listening to this right now that have created the nightmares. So the question that I ask myself is, why did we do that? How did we do it? And what can we do about it? So with that, how do I move the slide down?
There should be just an arrow.
There it is. There it is. I figured it out. I could go into a huge conversation about all the details and all the facts and figures and all the racial injustice and the slavery and all this stuff, but I'm going to start with one big slide. The United States is the world's leader in incarceration. We have 25% of the world's prisoners and just 5% of the world's population. So what's up with that? I mean, there is something functionally wrong about that. I didn't know that 20 years ago or 10 years ago. When I started into this game, I was completely divorced and disassociated from politics, from government. I had chosen not to do either one of those things when I was a young woman. And I had gone into personal empowerment because I wanted to teach leaders how to lead. And I didn't understand that when you ride a horse, I did actually understand that when you ride a horse, people think you're leading it from the reins, when actually you're staying on that horse. If you have the ability to hold your energy stable at the bottom end of your body, in your bottom chakras, could you hold on to the rear end of the horse? Because it's the rear end of the horse that's going to buck you off. So when I started looking at this game, I went, what the heck happened to America? What happened to free enterprise? What happened to freedom? And it's taken me 10 years to get to the bottom of it. And recently I met a gentleman by the name of Steve Newcomb, who wrote a book called Pagans in the Promised Land. And I'm going to talk about more about him and a couple of other guys that are related to this. But he wrote a book, Pagans in the Promised Land, about the doctrine of discoveries and about the papal bulls that were written back in the 12th century that controlled shipping and commerce as people came to America and settled the Americas, and how the dehumanization from the Indo-European, Eastern Europeans moved across the seas to land in America. The indigenous people in that book, when you really do read the details underneath it, and I'm going to at some point interview Steve Newcomb and Paul Majid and Jewel James and some of the other people that are experts in this work. I'm going to interview them on some of my Joy Talk radios, but for right now, in the bottom, at the baseline, what happened is that when the papal bulls came here and they became the basis of our legal and justice system and the rights to own and take over land, what happened is that indigenous people were called heathens. They were less than human, and their lands could be taken, they could be slaughtered, it didn't matter. Above them, believe it or not, the class of slaves was actually a higher class than the heathens. The slaves you could get legal title to, you could trade them, you could use them in commerce, and you could take them across the seas and back here. And so the whole slave trade developed. But I didn't realize, I never understood really what was at the basis of the problem. And the basis of the problem is the domination code and the dehumanization. So what's happened is by today, This is 800 years later, by the way. This is 800 years after the time the Doctrine of Discoveries and the Papal Bulls were written in the 12th century. We have now followed the leader and done the same thing that the empires and the emperors of 800 years ago, how they managed their world. And you know what? Back then, the land was flat. We believed the earth was flat then. Today, we know better. And so what we've done, however, is we've stayed with the same kinds of business models, the same kinds of thinking, and the rest of humans today are now considered debt instruments to the municipal governments and the government organizations that own the body at the point of arrest. And they become a secure and irretrievable government asset. Now, I don't have time to go into that, but what I want to say is it has created a huge economic problem in the world. It is the #1 problem, in my opinion, is changing and understanding the economic and the overcast, the middle class caste, the average caste system, and the outcasts who are less than human. As a result of that, 1 in 6 Latinx men are born in 2001 can expect to go to prison. African Americans are incarcerated in state prisons at a rate that's 5 to 1 times the imprisonment of rights. Some states it's 10 to 1. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reports that 35% of state prisoners are white, 38% are Black, 21% are Hispanic. And in 12 states, more than half of the prison population is African American. They don't even talk about Native Americans because we have eradicated millions of them with the policies. And I don't say we as you and me, it's not our fault. It is our responsibility now to understand what our American culture has done. But it's important that we understand that in most of these conversations, they don't even talk. And most of these imprisonment conversations and the caste systems and all these things, they don't even, it's like the Native Americans they're gone. They're not even talked about. Why? Because we've actually destroyed them. There are reservations that still exist, of course, but I was amazed to find that there are no Indian reservations, even in some states in the United States. We've got several in Whatcom County in this area. So I ended up studying a lot about what's happened to the Native Americans. Again, that's not the topic today. I just want to shock you awake to the fact that we're following leaders from 800 years ago, and it's time to change the game. The real game now is putting people to work to recognize the sheer gaposis of time and the speed of change. Most of us on the call, I would imagine, are up in our 40s or 50s, and 60s, 70s. We lived in a world that was going very fast. I mean, when I first started this conversation, the internet was, that was there, but I didn't realize how powerful the speed of technology has moving us forward today. It used to be that only 8.2% of households in the US owned a computer in 1984. And it's interesting, when you go talk to the college students at Western and you ask them if they know what computer programs they know, they say they don't even have a computer. And the first time somebody said that to me, I went, what do you mean you don't have a computer? How could you be in college today and not have a computer? And then I recognized that they don't own old-fashioned computers. These are old foods. They own mobile devices. 5 billion people in the world own a mobile device. Do you know how many people 5 billion people is? I can't even comprehend it, but it's massive. And mobile sales alone could make up 72.9% of all e-commerce sales. 2.65 billion people in the world use social media. 40% of the world's population has access to the internet. And 90% of the world's data was generated within the past 2 years alone. And information is doubling every 12 years. That's phenomenal. The speed of change is so fast, and we're still running around trying to figure out how to change domination codes from 800 years ago. I think we need to get in the game. And one of the things you guys are talking about is how to reverse, well, we're all talking about how do we actually reverse mass incarceration or eradicate it. And I know that donut economics has been a big subject. I read the book, it was fascinating, because this is a woman who actually knows how to talk about big business. And I'm really pleased. I was delighted to read it because I quit economics 40 years ago when I was in school, because it didn't make any sense to me that we were playing these games about money and stock markets and all these things, when in fact, very little of the economics game that is measured has anything to do with the actual product of goods at the bottom, which has to do with feeding humans and taking care of the world. One of our biggest jobs is to turn our economic conversation around. We have all been focused on the war and prison and jail economy, media money, and the marginalized economy of people who are losing out, and let's sell you another story so we can sell you more consumer goods. We've also used addiction drugs and the fake food economy to prop up and be busy. But the fact of the matter is, in the last few years, like I read a statistic one time, I can't remember where I got it, but it was like they built 22 prisons in California in the same time they built a school. And I started looking at that when I first became a president of the Restorative Community Coalition. And I said, the cost of incarceration is so small. I mean, it's so massive. And the cost of education is so small. Why don't we just flip that conversation upside down? Why do we keep trying to fix what's bad about the prison system, which keeps us, okay, I learned this from coaching humans and coaching free enterprise. Vision becomes reality. They actually teach that in coaching kids in sports. They actually teach that in all of our power of positive thinking and our visualization games. It's all about how vision becomes reality. Well, if all we talk about is the miseries, guess what? We create more miseries. What we need to do is talk about health, healing, vitality, putting people to work. There was one day I went to a school. I went to take my son's graduation or college papers into the college or whatever it was. And we had just opened another war. You know, we just bombed another country. And I just walked in, my heart was just crying because I went, how can we be doing this in the 20th century? What are we doing? Still bombing people. Don't we realize that it's causing mass devastation of our ecosystem? We're killing species. we're killing. I mean, we depend upon this. We depend upon the earth for our lives. Why are we destroying the earth? This doesn't make any sense. So I commented to the woman who was behind the counter, and I said, I cannot believe we're still doing this. What are we doing? And she says, oh, I get it. Little 18-year-old, 19-year-old smart student. I know exactly why we're doing it. We have to have, it's time for Armageddon. I mean, it's time for the Christians to dominate. And we have to have, and she went on with this whole litany of things that she had been programmed by her family to believe in, her religions and her culture, and that it was okay. And I looked at her and I couldn't even speak. And I walked outside and I sat in my car and I went, what would I have to believe with such fervor that we have to make war? We have to kill people. We have to have an Armageddon. We have to destroy so that humans we can inherit, the good people, the nice, meek people can inherit the earth. How in the world we can go to heaven? I mean, this didn't even make any sense to me. And I said, but what would I take to have to believe that? And what it would take is what I reasoned in my very farm-like manner. I said, how many people would I need to know that were evil for me to justify this, so that we could justify eradicating evil, so we could fight evil? And I would have to know, rationally, 50% of the people out there, do I even believe in evil and good as a reality? And I went, I'd have to believe that there were equal amounts of evil and good in the world to justify going to war to eradicate evil. So I thought, how many people in the world do I know personally? I mean, personally, let's get down home. How many people in the world do I know? And I would ask everyone on the call this. How many people do you know that are really, truly evil to justify these wars? And I thought about it, and I knew one. He was the hillside strangler who killed a friend of mine, and serial killer, and he was pretty bad. He was evil, if I believed in it. And then I thought, well, by comparison, how many people do I really know in the world that I've met personally that are fundamentally good people. They try to do the right things. Sometimes they make mistakes, but they try to do the right things if you correct them. And I realized that as a nationally known public speaker, I probably had met 100,000 people. Well, 1 to 100,000 is sort of disproportionate. And I went, and we've built our entire economy, our world, our systems based upon that ratio. Something is wrong. We need to turn it upside down. So one of the things I want to say is when I'm listening to Humanity Rising and you guys are talking about donut economics and you're talking about changing the systems and you're on the right track. Don't waste time going back and reading all the statistics that I had to read to get here. Just go to work. We've got a project. If you simply, this document is on my website, joygilfillan.com, and at the Restorative Community Coalition. But if we simply go from, this is the system we've developed, where we have adverse childhood experiences and trauma that happens at childhood. We move up through addictions and acute distress, and we go through mental illness. We build court problems. We do probation. We take people to jail. We punishment. We imprison them, and then you make money on them, get them back out. All of these are economic engines to somebody. It's not for the people, but it's to systems that make money on all of that trauma. Well, what if you simply flip that open, take a sheet of paper and fold this thing in the center and go, okay, on the left side is all the things that are taking us down. On the right side are all the things that we can do to build up. We can change the supply-demand chain. We can stop putting people in jails in the first place, because it's at the point of arrest that the human body goes from being financially, legally in your control to being under the control of government agencies of some kind, or contractors, privately owned contractors who do business with the government, et cetera, et cetera. It's massive. Number 2, events in prevention, harm reduction, addiction and community rehabilitation, wet houses, et cetera. I did a booklet called Stop Punishing Taxpayers, Start Rebuilding Community back in 2015 when I decided to first run for office, so that the population could understand, the people in our community, the civic leaders could understand that jails was not the only choice to solving the problems that we had in the community. There were hundreds of other solutions, but people weren't taught that. They were simply told by the top law enforcement CEOs that we needed a jail. Stop tax profiteering on debt, poverty, and the wounded. Reduce warrants and the paper rules that keep putting people back in jail. There's a whole string of things. Using restorative justice, developing, but this is the power. Start developing true apprenticeships, coaching programs, co-ops and collaboratives, and doing things in the local community. It is at the local community level where you have economic power to change the economy. Do it there. Well, let me step back a bit. Why did I come up with, I and my team? I mean, there's hundreds of people worked with us at the Visitor and at the Restorative Community Coalition to do the research so that we could get to the point that I could tell you what I just told you. But why do humans underperform relative to their potential? This is a question I asked myself back quite a few years, back in the 90s. And it was when I was raising my kids. They're not this age. They don't look like this. At that point, they were in 3rd and 5th grade, or 4th and 6th or something. And I was a mother, and I was coaching a bunch of young boys in basketball. And there were 9 kids that I was coaching because, frankly, there were no other adults around who could do the job. I went to the Boys and Girls Club to coach the boys. And I found out that most of the parents were missing in action. And I found out that it was really sad. I was basically a white picket fence type of mother because I was a career woman. I had a national business. I was doing $3.5 million in sales, and this was before the internet. And I was selling Whole Foods to a market that wasn't even ready for vitamin C yet. Whole Foods, wildcrafted supplements. But I went to school one day as a parent, and I had walked in to a school where all these kids are walking up and down the halls, and they're they're misshapen, they're overweight, they're coughing, they're sort of sick. But I went into the cafeteria to feed breakfast. And one of the little boys on my team, who was one of the most difficult children ever, because he was so hyperactive. He was like ADD and, I don't know what he was. He was a mess. And he walked in totally calm and peaceful. And I looked at him and I went, wow, what happened? And within 5 minutes after he ate breakfast, he was flying off the walls, flying off. I mean, he was like a, I don't know, a whirligig, you push a button and they fly away. This kid was a mess. And so I went over and I looked at his food. And I went, my God, everything he ate has red and yellow dye and synthetics and sugar and fake foods. The whole breakfast was fake foods. No wonder this kid was reacting. He needed the Feingold diet. He needed nutritional help. My God, this kid was going to be a nightmare for the parents all day long, and they're going to probably put him on Ritalin, which I found out that they do. Then I walked out into the hallway and I'm looking at all these kids walking up and down the hallway and they're coughing and they're sick. And I went, my God, 30 years ago, I only had one, what we then called fat kids, in my entire grade school. And there were dozens of them walking up and down the hallway. And they were misshapen. And I went, wow, we got a problem. Then I went into the classroom and I was reading to students. The teacher wanted me to help these kids. And she said, before you read to them, I'm going to send you down about 5 during the course of the morning. Before you read to them, connect, because they need connection, human connection. Ask them how they're doing. So I did. And what was stunning is I found out that one of the kids, his mother was dead. And his father was, no, this was a girl. Her mother was dead. And her father was dealing with jail and prison stuff. I talked to another young man. His mother was home. His brother would beat him up. He was out running around homeless in the middle of the night because he couldn't stand being inside the house. They were putting him on Ritalin. They were doing all these things. The list just went on. And I walked out of the school, and on my way out, I saw the kitchen cabinet for the nurse. Not the kitchen cabinet. It was her cabinet that held all the prescription drugs. And I walked into her room and I looked at the drugs and I went, could you just tell me something? Because I need some grounding here. I don't know if I'm just, getting hyperactive, hyperreactive, but what's the reality? How many of these kids are on legal drugs on an average time when it's not sick? And I said, she says, oh, well, I can't tell you that. And I said, just give me a ballpark. I just want a field estimate. My gosh, you've got to feed it to these guys. Is it 50%, 30%, 80%? Where is it? And she said, well, you really want to know? And I said, yeah. And I'm not doing it for investigative news. I just want to know. I'm a mom and I want to know. And she said, between 60 and 70%. And I said, and during sick season, what is it? And she says, oh, it's approaching 80%. And I walked out of there and I went, we are legally prescribing between 60 and 80% of legal drugs to our kids. And we expect our kids to grow up not taking pills, not doing drugs. This is preposterous. And I just went home and I went, I got to do something different here. I got to get to the bottom of this. So I started looking around. Oh, I went too far. Hold on. I started looking around at what was going out there in the marketplace. And I realized that our entire world was in chaos. The very thing we're facing today in the marketplace right now is what I saw as a premonition, if you will, back in 1994. And I went, I am supposed to be one of the top business leaders, entrepreneurial coaches there is. And I'm off course because I'm following the same leaders that got us to right here. I need to change course. And I stopped selling. I stopped promoting. I stopped coaching business. I went into a kind of in-breath mode. Instead of selling everything that I knew that I could make money on, I'd get rich, I'd be famous, I'd do good. I went, I got to shut up and I just got to listen. I'm going to back off. It's like feminine aspect listening as opposed to masculine aspect. That, as the story goes, that feminine sits back and listens. So I sat back and I went, I'm just going to listen for a while. And one of the things that I recognized is the technology was moving so fast. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And a few years later, I did this report to give an idea of what was happening at the turn of the century and how fast the market was moving. And the fact that we had gone from old-fashioned regular phones and faxing to email, voicemail, and now we're in smartphones, iPads, mobile computers. The fact that we've gone from physical banks to internet banks, the fact that we've, everything has just moved so fast. It was terrifying to me. So I went back. I want to go back to this post because this is out of order. When I was talking about the doctrine of discoveries, and I realized that the emperors created stories, myths, and laws to control people by fear, and they believed the world was flat. Well, think about that. Not only was the internet moving quick, I went back and I looked at how fast our bodies are spinning around on this world in the universe, spinning around in the universe. The Earth rotates every 23 hours and 56 minutes. I thought it was 24, whatever. The speed is roughly 1,000,000 miles or 1,000 miles an hour. The Earth is moving about our sun at about 67,000 miles per hour. And our solar system, Earth and all, whirls around the center of our galaxy at some 220 kilometers per second or 490,000 miles an hour. You know how fast we're spinning? Our world is changing. Our bodies are changing. Everything in our world is changing. So I went back and I said, okay, I'm a mom in Bellingham. How does the world work in a way that I can work with it? Because I cannot sit still and continue to follow leaders that don't know where they're going. I've got to back up. Even if I'm just a mom in Bellingham, what am I going to do? What if I actually, and I thought back when I was a kid, they used to teach us in 4-H that, one person could change the world. And I went, is that true or is that not true? What's up with that? So I started to build a system that I could work with based upon my understanding of nature, and in my meditations and in my reading of hundreds and hundreds of books and studying on all kinds of things. I backed up to the fact that, the one thing I could trust in my own life was nature, and nature has a pattern. And I'm going to go over this relative to how I use the model in breaking the incarceration industry apart. But in short, up here, I figured out that the world works in a birth, growth, death, reciprocating pattern. It happens all the time. Bacteria do the same things. We got bacteria that eat us up when we're dying. We got bacteria to keep us growing. Everything in the world works in spirals. Everything is alive in this living universe that we live in. So I built a model, a practical model I could use to help me understand past, present, and future, body, mind, spirit as it works. Then I built a model, a spiral pattern for how the human body develops. And how do we learn and grow? And I realized that there was a 9-step spiral growth model that was basically body, mind, spirit, body, mind, spirit, body, mind, spirit, growing in cycles from the physical known to the unknown as we decompose, and from the unknown to the physical as we compose. And there's this pattern, and it goes both directions. And we can use that to help us organize how fast the world's changing and how I'm changing relative to that world, because I figured out that I feel divine emotional intelligence. My body is a receptor system, and I'm a transmitter receptor. I am part of a living world. It's not a joke. It's real. And the reason I figured that out is because when I go ride horses, when I go deal with my bull on the farm, I had to feel them. I had to sense them, or I'd get my butt kicked. And I couldn't afford to get hurt on a farm when there's nobody else there. And I'm 15 miles from town, about 30 to 40 minutes. I'm not going to go get help. You got to learn to listen to the world around you. So I started using my emotional intelligence to understand it. I realized my sons were in trouble. I was going to build an emotional resilience navigation system for them. And I built a very simple model for how fear manages us, how we can hold ourselves nice and stable when we're alone. Meditation's great. But when you get out in the world and the world's moving really fast around you, you need something stronger than that. And I realized that the joy energy, the energy of living into the future, the energy of courage brings up a bubble of energy of joy. And it's not love that can heal the world. Love is all of it. Joy energy has the energetic power to eradicate fear. And it's like flipping the light on. You know, you can turn on the light or you can fumble around in the dark. Well, I chose to build a model that I could use for myself and to coach others to think fast and move quick under stress. Then I built a different model, which was, okay, now that I'm in the game and I'm living in the physical, how do I analyze the game so that I can preempt and see what's coming in the non-physical? Like, what is the next 20 years in the United States and in the world going to look like? I don't know. The only thing I have is where I'm at right now. So I look down the left side and I analyze it from a physical, a dynamic, business, mental, and a spiritual, creative potential. What's happening in the world today? What are the resources I have to work with? And what are the clues about the future, the emerging trends? So I built a tic-tac-toe model that I can fill in the blank for anything at any time, anywhere. And I didn't have to have a bunch of papers and a bunch of books to carry with me. I could do it on the fly in the field. Then over the last while, I started to really understand, and I'm going to show you this chart in a minute, this one, this one about the systemic human behavior, these patterns, because what I discovered before I even graduated from high school was a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay, and transactional analysis and how we create habits of addiction and abuse and stuff. And it's the Stephen Cartman drama triangle that he wrote and taught about back then. And I started looking at that as the story trap that we live into and how that story trap actually has become, it's the persecutor victim rescue. It's the good guy, bad guy victim. It's, you know, it actually is the mythological story for how to deal with fear and how to use fear as an economic machine to sell goods, services. They'll even teach you in marketing that you have to scare people, you have to touch their pain point, and then at the last minute, you spring it on them that they should take an action, and that's how you sell things. So what I did is I used the same model to analyze the prison industrial complex and to understand how it is that fear takes control. So I want to back up. This new operating model is actually pretty amazing when you look at this. And I think that Humanity Rising, you guys have been touching on this a lot of different ways, but most of us are thinking about it very cerebrally. We think about it, you know, in our minds. We do all these exercises about us, but the key is putting yourself in the saddle and doing work in the community and living in real nature and understanding that every single thing in the world around you is not the same. I have already changed your lives today. It's not a joke. By simply talking to you through a machine and putting my own passion and my own my verbal communication out through the ethers, this is going out to hopefully thousands of people. And every single one of you is a human being, and you're interpreting what I'm saying in your own way. I can't control how you're going to interpret it. What I can do is control how I deliver it. And when you walk into any party, if you walk in with happiness and joy and laughter, people are going to look at you with happiness, joy, and laughter, and they're going to be curious about what you're doing. If you walk in and you're angry and you're stomping and you're yelling, everybody in the room is going to scatter because nobody wants to talk to somebody who's really angry. That's bioenergetic intelligence. And this chart right here is the way that I was able to look at bioenergetic intelligence as just a natural phenomenon of a world in motion. That circle there, that thing in the center with the triangle and then the yin yang symbol in the center, that's sort of a replica of the way the world is spinning as it's spinning through the universe and around the sun. And then as the universe is moving through space and time, some people think we don't have it. I happen to think there's real space and time because my body's older than it was 20 years ago and it doesn't feel the same. So where are we? The question is, the only space we actually have control of is right now. And I call it right now because in our minds, we are living here right now, dealing with many thousands of things going through our head. Our bodies are already, they've already been developed and they're dying off. There's billions of things happening inside my body and billions of bugs in there living on me that are, you know, processing the food, the water, and the air that I put in that are going away. And the only thing I have to work with is my desire, my attraction factor, my curiosity about the future and how I am composing the future from the ethers and the energetic information that's out there. I'm bringing it into my mind and turning it into matter and into books and documents and things so I can communicate with you all. And then the stuff I produced 10 years ago is already decomposing and it's in the past and people don't even want to hear it. So this is a practical way of looking at past, present, and future, but it's putting in the context of we are living human beings in the living world and there's bugs everywhere and there's critters that will live on you. And there are critters that will help you. We're host organisms, just like anything else. And the energy of me is going out through the ethers and everything I'm speaking is reverberating in the world around me right now. So nature reuses, recycles, and regenerates. I built systems to explain that. And basically we're walking body, mind, spirit in motion. We see, we talk, we crawl, we stand. In the first 9 months, we're doing all of that. We walk, we fight, we think, we adjust and figure out the bombs in the other room, and then we run. And this is a pattern that we replicate forever. And this is where we get caught up in following leaders that are going the wrong direction because we are conditioned to follow this pattern of learning. The rest of our lives, we do it over and over and over. And I've developed models where I can show you how it happens in business, how the pattern replicates in government systems, how it replicates everywhere in the world. It replicates on the internet. You know, I mean, we learn and we grow and we build systems that replicate who we are. And we can go backwards down the rabbit hole. We can go upwards into change. And that's what I want to speak about. And I realize I need to speed up a little bit. This intentional change model is what I talked about earlier. You can turn this if you do two columns down, you know, draw vertical lines. This is intentional change, conscious choices, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is you can look at where we are now, our historical patterns, and do a quick snapshot of where we're at. And we're sort of in a mess. You can go clear over here to the right and look at the emerging trends, which is the speed of change that I already talked about. I mean, and here's the good news. Here's some really good news. You know how many people, how many thousands of organizations are working on sustainability, on social change, on environmental change? Read the book, Blessed Unrest. That book's amazing. The guy listed a whole pile of things that are going right in the world. Humanity Rising. Look at, you've had 300 conversations. You're doing things right in the world. And what do we read in the news? All the miseries. So list the emerging trends, the best books. You guys are doing all those things right. In the middle is what can we do now? How fast can we change and who can we talk to? So when I started looking at this fear to joy triangle model and using it, I now have used this model to understand what's going on in our local community. I went and I looked at the roadmap to conscious change. Could we work? Could we change the world? Yes, we can. Can we do it on the internet? Yeah, it's our most powerful tool to be able to make changes in the world. You can actually diagram down the left-hand side here. You can diagram from body, mind, spirit to how we're decomposing. And you can do the same thing I did in that red and green chart in the beginning. You can actually mirror the subject and go over here. If it wasn't like this on the left-hand side where we're hurting ourselves, how can we move to the right-hand side and find a solution? How could it work if we weren't where we were and we didn't believe what we used to believe? When I joined the Restorative Community Coalition, I found out that my county wanted to build my sheriff, my prosecutor, all my law enforcement CEOs. I didn't know, by the way, that any of these guys were CEOs when I started this game. I thought they were my elected officials who were there to protect my freedom. And what I found out by becoming the president of the Restorative Community Coalition and doing a bunch of work, I found out that these guys are the chief executive officers of their departments of a corporation called Whatcom County. The sheriff runs the jail. He runs the law enforcement for the deputies in the community, and he runs the emergency management system. And his office in our particular county runs between 60 and 65% of the entire Whatcom County budget. That's extraordinary. I didn't know that when I started. I probably wouldn't have started. But when I found out that the prosecutor doesn't just prosecute bad guys, I thought he was there prosecuting criminals, really taking these killers away. And I voted for the same prosecutor for 40 years. You know why? Because he prosecuted that guy that killed my friend. I liked the guy. I thought, terrific, awesome. He's got the world's in good hands. I'll follow him down the road. We passed taxes. We did all kinds of things. I just believed in them because he was the criminal prosecutor. You know what I found out by talking to him at one point? I'm sitting in there in his office trying to figure out why he wouldn't prosecute a major businessman in this town. You know what he said? He said, my job is to protect, I'm the corporate attorney for the county, the corporation. My job is to protect the corporation from the taxpayers. I don't know that he intended to say it quite like that. And maybe he didn't say it quite like that, but that sure as heck is what I heard. And that's the first clue I got, that the prosecutor doesn't work for us, the taxpayers. He wears a couple different hats. He's our civil prosecuting. He runs a civil division, and he runs a criminal division, and then he runs the corporate division, and nobody talks about that. I've got an article that I'm going to share with you at the end that's about jails and sheriffs and the corporal system. And I think this conversation is finally starting to come out, that these guys are corporate executives. They have departments that they run, they have budgets, and they're chief executive officers of their departments inside a corporation that is also a corporation. And that's where we run into problems with oaths of office, with loyalty, etc. I'll get to that in a minute. The third officer so I have the sheriff, the prosecutor, and I have the chief executive officer for the county corporation. That corporation is a business that has business centers. And guess what? Criminal justice and the justice system is one of the biggest money generating systems that keep a government afloat. I didn't know that when I started. So naively, I went to speak to the stakeholders group. It was one of our county executives. He had 27 people on his team that he always talked with. And I went, you know what? I need to ask these people, how are we going to handle the changes ahead? The world is moving so fast, we're in trouble. You know what? I found out they didn't even know. They didn't know. They were living in their silo. I asked him, how many of you guys went to the Transition Whatcom event last weekend? There were 900 people who came to this transition event, which was talking about peak oil and economic problems and environmental problems. None of them had gone. None of them knew anything about it. And I went, my God, we're living in a silo, a real silo. So I'm going to skip through a couple of these images very quick. This is a collage that explains how I went from doing diagnostic work in the community world to waterfront development work, to Stop Punishing the Taxpayers report that I talked about earlier, to writing up a report on noble cause corruption, to recognizing that the system works for the system. The mass incarceration industry is a silo. It has no heart. There are no humans. This is part of the issue of corporations or people. They're not people. They have no heart. They have no compassion. They're dehumanizing and they're dominating. It's time to get beyond the systems. We've developed models that are in the Stop Punishing Taxpayers report that you guys can get off the websites. We have a degenerative incarceration economy. We have a regenerative restorative economy. There's a lot that you guys can do with donut economics. You're all on the right course. Regenerative economics, put people back to work locally, local farmers, local people, local business is the solution. And we can do it because guess what? Guess who elects the sheriff, the prosecutor, and the executive? You do. In your own town, you do. You can control your own local economy once you understand the game, and that's the key. You need to understand that government and social services and jail and prison vendors, they're all part of a massive economic system that is a domination system at work to generate money, to expand governments, to expand institutions, and to expand jail and prison industry profiteers. There's more. Again, what I finally did, oh my God, I finally went, okay, how come I can't break through the sheriff and the prosecutor and the executive to actually get them on the business to help us solve the social problems that we've got, the social dilemmas that we have? And they wouldn't talk. We brought in Vera Institute of Justice. We failed a jail tax. We failed a second jail tax. We did all these things. And finally, I did this Whatcom County Jail Trauma Report, this job. I sat down and I went, okay, if none of these guys actually want to solve the problem, what's the actual problem? And I sat down and I started interviewing 53 people who had gone through the jail and justice system, who we had helped through the Restorative Community Coalition with reentry. And I went, would you guys please talk to me about what actually happens in there? Would you tell me at the grassroots what happens? And you don't have to tell me your story and go back into the trauma of it. I don't want to go there with you or for us. You don't need to relitigate the trauma. What I want you to do is talk with me about how do we get out of the fix? How do we solve the problem? Where during your process of entering the system and staying in the system, could we actually get you out or make a change, a little tiny incremental change that could have changed your trajectory? And they agreed to do it. And in the process, I built this checklist. And what I realized is that people, when they enter the jail and justice system in that first 24 to 72 hours, they go through so much personal trauma that they end up with something called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, it's basically a break of the brain. It basically splits the left and right hemisphere of the brain through the neural net, and they call it split-brained. Some people call it spin break. Some people call it broken brain. Some people call it just becoming psychotic and mentally ill and crazy. And what I found out, interestingly enough, is that most of the people that I talked to, they weren't crazy when they entered the system. They were perfectly fine. They were just distressed. They were emotional distraught. They had problems in their real life. And then that led me to talk to the people who were their family members and the emergency responders and the jailer. I mean, some of these people, I talked to all kinds of people, another 26, I think it was, on top of the 53, 79 people total. And I said, what actually happens at the point of an emergency? Who gets called? How does it work? How do people end up in it? And what I found out is that most people call 911 to get help. And they do not recognize that since technology has happened, since 9/11, and all these fancy security issues and fears of being hurt showed up, we changed the 911 system, and it now becomes a system where oftentimes they send a cop first. They don't necessarily send, unless it's an actual physical accident, but if there's mental distress or whatever, they send a cop first. And the cop people respond, and it's not good. So we end up with these extreme trauma experiences that actually permeates our entire system, and nobody wants to talk about that. Yet that's where we need to go to dealing with the trauma, because we are exploding the amount of trauma that's going out there. 10 to 14 million people a year enter jails in a recycling churn system. 2.2 million are held inside state and federal prisons. 4.4 are under custodial supervision. That means all of these people are under surveillance. You know what that does to the stress level? I mean, it's hurting us. It's hurting us all. And right now, we just went through COVID. We just went through isolation. You just talked about that the other day, Jim. And that's a problem. So the biggest thing we have to do is actually heal people from the distress. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I did a video that's on my Joy Talk about civic blind spots, but how we have created this economic civic war from a global level. We have landed billionaires fighting with cloud billionaires. We have institutional, educational, and generation gaps in our media technology. We have commercialism and consumerism versus corporatism in our government systems. But underneath it, we have the civic war, and we have civic refugees. And over the system, we have moneymakers. And that's the overcast system. And so we have to work at all these different levels, but the bottom line, the solution, is understand that there are patterns of behavior that tear us down, and there are patterns of behavior that take us up. Our job is to stay in the updraft. We can use this conditioning triangle model to help you understand the roles of different people. But the key I want you to look at is focus on the right-hand side in that yellow triangle. It's build, lead, innovate, organize, develop, and protect, provide, produce, and protect people, integrate the knowledge, use your body, your mind, and your spirit, your capacity, your full human capacity, it every day, all the time, to lead people towards happiness. We have a generational edge right now. The speed of change is fast. The children are ready. The millennials, the kids that are out there are high speed. They know how to use technology. We need to do the myth busting, new stories, songs, everything we can use to permeate and tell people that humans are not bad. Humans are good. The old story is out of date. It's 800 years old. Humans are the most amazing species on this planet. We have the ability to communicate through light waves. We have the ability to transform all these systems, and we can do it fast because the power of exponential potential, the power of happiness, the power of joy, the power of energy, the human power to create change. We can build change in every single city across the nation. Go after your prosecutors, go after your sheriff, go after your CEO, not to hate on them, but to teach them how to humanize, how to become loving, graceful, awesome people who can help us change the future. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I think I overtalked anyway, Jim. Sorry about that. But I want to share that you can go to my joygilfillan.com website for some of my own current stuff. I don't have all the things on there about the coaches and the training and the programs I'm going to do with Joy Talk, etc. That's all coming. Subscribe to my newsletter. I'm going to get that working and sending information out. You can email me at joythinks@gmail.com. I'm more than willing to become a speaker anywhere. We need to get the news out as fast as possible. If you can take this and speak it yourself, do it. The president of the Restorative Community Coalition job, we've built all kinds of things in draft. We need funding to be able to support the production of material so we can start teaching people how to do more and faster restorative justice, restorative circles, how to do reentry support, how to do case navigation and mentoring and case interception and court navigating. There's a lot of work that can be done, but just the bottom line is get in action, do it. Just do it. And you can go, there's all kinds of, I was starting to fill out this list of all the people you can go talk to. Vera Institute, if you're a stat nerd and you need to talk about those things, there's all kinds of resources out there. I will post a list on the chat platform later, not on the chat platform. I'll give it to the guy that has the network. But this is an article that I think every one of you can read. It's Jail Sheriffs and Carceral Policy. It's on Vanderbilt University. They just did a study. I just saw it this morning when I was looking up some of my other resources. And my God, for the first time, I see somebody is actually studying how it is that sheriffs control law and justice. This is amazing. And how, I mean, I haven't even had time to read it all, but just reading the abstract, stunning work. So this is awesome. The work's out there. Sing, draw pictures, infuse people with energy. Trust yourselves, folks. You know what to do and you know how to do it. It's time. So with that, I give it back.
Thank you, Joy.
How are you?
Very powerful. You're an inspiration. What I would call a force of nature. So
we all are. We just got to trust it.
Thank you for being who you are.
So are you. I tried to read your college talk about the doctrines of discoveries and humanity and all these things from, I forget the book. And it was so smart, I couldn't read it all. But you were right on the money so many years ago. So thank you for doing such an amazing amount of work in the world. What you've done with Ubiquity University, what you've done with this whole program, everything you're doing, it's an honor to know you. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I think, all of us in our own ways, you and yours, we at some point in your life, you realize that you have a certain calling in your deep interior. And that if you have the courage to just follow your own soul path, you're led to a life that you can't imagine before you started. And I have a feeling, as you look back, you just kind of gave yourself into life as I've tried to do. And I think most of the people that are attracted to Humanity Rising in one way or another, we're trying to get out of that corporate, conventional, very limited box and experience the full dimensionality of what it means to be alive. So thank you. One thing that we have about 10 minutes left, but I think people would be interested in a little bit more detailed, Joy, of the story of how you took on the building of the prison and really organize effectively enough to stop it. Could you take a few minutes to just tell that story?
I absolutely can. It was
more detail. It's an inspirational story.
I gotta say, I didn't intend to do it at all. I was absolutely not interested. My friend Irene Morgan is actually the founder of the coalition. She started it years ago, and she started it from this idea that she was going to help people get better, right? Because that's what she is. She's a human healer type person. And I joined her when I realized that you can't help people get better at any volume if you've also got so much volume going into the end of the marketing funnel. And I went, oh, what's that marketing funnel, and why? And so when I started first talking to our law enforcement agencies, like I said, I took that PowerPoint to them, and I found out that they didn't even know what was going on over there. And so I started researching it. And at first, in the beginning, we started talking to all of our council members. We started trying to lobby them. We started to give them, we gave them hundreds and hundreds of links from the Norway prison system to, all of these other people who are doing the right things in the world. We sent them links about restorative justice, and they ignored us. And it wasn't until I finally made a list. Irene had been working with so many people, and she made a list of 15 different ways that people were getting arrested that wasn't right. And when she and I found the pattern 3 different times in different, completely different people, failures of the system, we made this list. And we went, God, this system has become corroded and corrosive and corrupted, and we got a problem, and we got to take it to the county council. And I did, and they looked at us and they go, so there's corruption. What are we going to do about it? We don't even know the language. And I sat back, and that's when I decided to run for county executive. That's part of the reason. But I also wrote this report, the one that I give you, Stop Punishing Taxpayers, Start Rebuilding Community, because I realized that people who are in the box doing the same thing, following the leader, being good kids, we all follow the leader down the road to the ruin. We took this list to them, and I said, we got to do something. I'm going to run for county executive and make it at least a public conversation. What I learned is that you don't talk about corruption to the corrupt people and tell them they're corrupt, especially if we're living in a box that says, how much money did you take? That's how I can prove that you're corrupt. No, the system is corrupted. It's not the people. They're just making mistakes. The system is corrupted. So when I ran the campaign against it, what I found is that the civic leaders, they wouldn't allow me to speak as a county executive candidate. I didn't get invited to the city club. What's that about? So I found out that there's a snookeries game. Irene came walking into the room one day and she says, Joy, we've been snookered. And I said, what? She said, we've been snookered. The system works for the system. It doesn't work for the people. We got to change the story. So we started working with how do we enroll the community? And then we had to go do community education seminars. We had to bring, by the time I got through jail number 1, jail tax 1, jail tax 2, I had to bring in attorneys that could speak on their subject. Actually, if you go to restorativecommunity.org, therestorativecommunity.org, and look at the jail tax tab, jail tax reform or whatever, there's a whole string of professionals that I enrolled in the game. And I said, you're an attorney, you're in the system, you don't like the system. What can you write about that's true for you that needs to be spoken? And so I got a guy from the corrections industry. He worked for CoreCivic, I think it was, to speak about domination inside the prison system. I got an attorney. I got a businessman who had ended up with a kid inside the system, and his son eventually ended up committing suicide because he couldn't figure out how to get out. He was mentally ill going in. He got felonies inside. He came out. He couldn't get a job, couldn't do stuff. He killed himself. And so his dad ended up stepping up saying, oh my God, we have a problem because we couldn't get help inside the system. We can't get it out. So I enrolled the business people in stepping up. So we voted against the tax the second time. It went down 58%. We gained 7% between the first time that we ran the campaign and the second. Then when I did the jail trauma chart, I finally went, you know what? The task forces, all the people that are part, I didn't realize, okay, so this is key. When we failed the taxes, the county officials finally figured out that they needed to pay some attention to this. So they brought in the Vera Institute of Justice to do a study on the criminal justice system. What's wrong with it? What do we need to fix? What can the bureaucrats do to fix it? So they did this whole, what do they call it? A fishbone diagram about what happens after you get arrested. But they didn't do any study of what happens before you get arrested and how to take people out of the system. And I went, wow, that's really interesting. And I realized, I tried to talk to the people at the Vera Institute of Justice. They were listening, and what they said, Joyce, somebody's got to do a study on what happens to people inside the system because we don't want to talk about it. And I went, okay, that's why we need to get inside the human part to understand why the sheriff isn't listening, why the prosecutors aren't listening, really listening, why no one is willing to jump the ditch from destruction to reconstruction. And that's when I did the trauma charts. And now I've got so much information, and now we can start actually talking about it. But it's a systems-wide change, Jim. It's systems-wide, and the systems-wide starts in the heart. And so we can't change the system until we affect the heart, and that's what you're doing. Does that help?
Yes, I think another aspect I would love to have you comment on is the factor of race. If
Yeah.
you read Michelle Alexander's book on the new Jim
Absolutely.
Crow, the incarceration system as it currently is constructed is to a large degree a continuation of chattel slavery, the punishment of Black men, segregation,
Sure.
Jim Crow laws, and now they're siphoning people of color, but principally Black males, into the prison system as a way of social control. What have you experienced about that aspect of the incarceration system where you are?
It's pretty awful, but it's hidden.
Yeah.
It's hidden because, you know what? Today, the system is a total domination system. It doesn't matter in Whatcom County anymore if you're white, Black, or Indian, Native. It does, but it's hidden below all these other statistics. And one of the ways that, I mean, I'm going to say this because when the sheriff did it, I just couldn't even believe him. I was talking about race, and I was talking about the problems of people that are left inside the system. And I was talking about specifically about what was happening to the Native people who were in the jail recycling. Did you know, for example, that you're not supposed to be arrested and held inside a jail for longer than 364 days at any time? Because if you are arrested, even if you're awaiting trial, you can't be in there that long, because that would be a felony type prison sentence. And it's not okay, for at least in Bellingham or Washington State. I don't know if that's universal globally, nationwide. But so you can only hold people for 364 days at a time. I had talked to people who were Native people who had been held in that jail for years. And I'd exposed it, and I couldn't understand, how did that happen? They were going from one charge to another. Some of them weren't even convicted. They were just being held for trial. The number of continuances were 8 and 9 months. I mean, it was horrible. And so I was in the task force in one of these public meetings, and I asked him, I said, how does that happen? He said, oh, I'm so sorry. The fact of the matter is, I'm really embarrassed to say it, but I have somebody who was in there for 8 years.
Wow.
And I went, what do you mean 8 years? And he said, well, we had to send him out to the mental health hospital for a while. We sent him to Wyoming for such and such a reason. We sent them here. We let him out. They violated probation. They came back. And a light bulb went on in my head, and I went, oh my God, they are using administrative reasons to take people out of the jail for one day. I looked at records, and they took them for one day. They moved them to Yakima, and then they re-entered them into Whatcom County. So technically they weren't in Whatcom County for 365 days straight. So they could play the game of moving people around. So this whole thing, slavery and the Black Lives Matter and all these things, I'm totally 100%, I get the problem. You read The Race to Incarcerate, you get it. It is a problem. But you know what? Worse than that is the domination system, the aristocracy, what I call the overcaste, the business leaders who run the banking system and the law systems. They run the CEO game. That's the problem. When we talk about prison violence and violence in the streets and police brutality, you know what? None of those people who are the chiefs, guess who they have to make happy? The sheriff. Because guess who controls the law? Ultimately, who is the one group of people who can prosecute, investigate, and look at police chiefs, at prosecutors, at everybody who works in their lower ranks? The sheriff controls the game. At least that's the way I found it worked in Whatcom County. When they did a homeless sweep of Whatcom County, they brought in 4 different law enforcement agencies to run a homeless sweep on a bunch of people who were in the undercast or the outcast. Our homeless people are at the bottom of the game. The overcast is law enforcement at the top. They brought in SWAT machines, they brought in snipers, they brought in all the stuff to overshadow people. It was terrifying. I was down there. I was trying to do restorative justice and intervention and all this stuff and help people deal with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I recognized that, oh my God, our entire community now is under complete domination and control. And who's in charge of that entire operation? The sheriff was. And he was basically telling the city police and all these other police, they have to mind. They got to go up rank. Rank domination. It's civic rankism. We create compound, complex. I've named it. It's complex civic domestic violence. It's being perpetrated against all of us, and we're being herded into systems. But the bottom line is, you know who could have stopped that entire incident? The sheriff. He could have simply walked into the streets and said, look, we're going to stop this game right now. We're going to do a restorative justice circle. We're going to sit down with all of these players, and we're going to figure out how to solve the problem. Winter's coming. It's going to be cold. I will provide winter shelter and emergency shelter. He didn't do that. I will provide food and public safety services to get people out of it. Let's open up one of the industrial parks. That's vacant. Let's open up the gym. I don't care what you open up. We got all kinds. Heck, you know what he's got? He's got a 3,000 square foot, 30,000 square foot emergency management shelter for managing a emergency incident. It was built for us by the feds. 4 people work in that building. Why are we not using that during the freezing weather that we had on January 28th and into February 14th? That's why I did the talk that I did. Go to Joy Talk, look up Whatcom County 98225, civic blind spots, and read my dissertation. I'm sorry, it's 90 minutes long. It's probably boring, but I was trying to wrap my head around how it was that we ended up in an emergency condition with homeless people potentially dying on the streets, our entire community being traumatized because our county did not provide emergency services beforehand. They weren't providing emergency shelter during the middle of winter. And now they're going to chase people around town and haze the homeless and do basically homeless genocide. I'm not okay with that. Now, I wasn't speaking quite that strongly at the time because I was still in shock. But today, that's where we're at. Up and down I-5, we've got protests, you've got police. The police are only doing what their CEOs are telling them to do. The top ranking commanders are the CEOs of law enforcement. Go after them, elect them, change them, talk to them. I don't mean go after them, hurt them. I mean, go after them with your heart. Show them that they're not paying attention to humanity. They're not actually living. Do you know what? Every one of those people goes and swears an oath of office. When they betray the oath of office to protect the corporation instead of the humans, they are morally breaching integrity. That's the problem. And the problem is one of our executives, when he went from being a candidate to being an officer, he actually said, I was going to protect the people until I sat down with the sheriff, the prosecutor, the executive, all of the officials. And then I decided that we were going to go ahead and write a jail building contract again to pass a tax. And then we'll put the survey of the humans third in line. And that's my colloquial story of it. But when I realized that, I went, my God, once you become the chief executive officer of a corporation, your fealty and your loyalty to the corporation supersedes your human commitment to humanity, because we make it that way. We can choose to change that. And we can choose, there's all kinds of methods out there to start looking at change. That's the key tipping point. That's when you look at optimal frugal needs and optimal leverage points, the tipping point is that person who commands the law. We got the same problems internationally and nationwide. We have the same problems in Washington, D.C. Guess what they're fighting over? Guess what that whole riot was over? The law. The letter of the law. Who's interpreting the letter of the law? Department of Justice. Wow, huh? President, no, he's the top CEO. I'm above the law. Congress, oh, I can't do anything. We got to fight between the right and the left. We got to fight between the House and the Senate. We got to fight. We got a duality problem. You've got constant conflict, every level. We need to change the conflict and stop avoiding the reality that we're not living in our heart. We're not living with our soul. We're not living to heal our planet, take care of our earth, and we're not living for the next generation. And that's our work. Our job is to be leaders of the future, not leaders of the past. We have to live into the future with full songs blazing. You know, all these meditations. Get out of your house. Go meditate with other humans in the homeless camps. Go meditate in the prisons. There's people doing all kinds of good things. Find them. Put your blood, sweat, and tears, put it into your community and help change it. That's where we're going to be able to overwhelm that overcast system and change the game. And I think we're probably running about out of time, right? What else do you, I mean, I could talk for hours on this, Jim.
But those were strong final words, Joy, of courage and determination and boundless inventiveness and curiosity.
That's the game.
Persistence. That's what it takes. You know,
Can I tell you something?
Spirits never give up.
I never
give up.
Jim, I never, ever, ever, ever intended to be in a protest. And because I don't like fighting. I don't like, I mean, I just don't. It's not part of my nature. So for me to be fighting a mass incarceration industry, wow, that's why I'm trying to transform it. I'm trying to transcend it. I'm trying to replace it because it isn't about fighting. But I found myself at one of the years, what was it, in 2012 or something, 2013, I actually led a protest. I couldn't believe it. It was just, stop building jails, start building systems and solutions. And I found myself standing on the courthouse steps holding a sign. And you know what's funny? You know what when I then was running for, what was I running for? Sheriff. When I was running for sheriff, you know what they did? We were running, I launched the Local Justice Reform Now Political Affairs Committee, political campaign pack. And do you know what the sheriff's office staff did when they were fighting? They wanted the new jail. I mean, I get it. The jails, the corrections deputies, they want a decent jail. They don't want to live in misery. The sheriff was mismanaging the jail on purpose to force us to build a new jail for him. And he was using his own staff. You can read the Noble Cause Corruption Report. I talk about it, but he was using his own staff to pressure us on Facebook. So you know what they did is they took the picture of us protesting the jail, and a guy took it was a great picture. It was very powerful for us, the people who were standing up for justice. He took the picture, he reversed it, and he changed the names, the words on the signs, and published it to say we support the jail. I can't even remember. It was so bad. It was total plagiarism. I mean, it was such abuse of power. I sent the message to the sheriff. He didn't take it down. But eventually, I mean, he pretended that he didn't know about it. But I went, you know what? That's the kind of dirty dealings that happen with people who are vested in wanting to win at all costs. And they will play these dirty manipulation games. But I published it. I wrote about it on social media. I got it out there in Facebook, and the voters eventually voted it down 58%. So you can gain ground. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Thank you. Thank you. You're a
Very
true
welcome.
warrior. You're a mom warrior.
Yeah. Well, I will put more links up, and I will work with your network to get a lot of links and references and things if people want to go into it. But bottom line, go into your heart and just go to work.
Well, I hope you can join the after session chat group. You're all welcome, everyone. Stan just put the link in the chat box.
Awesome.
So that brings our conversation to a close for today. But we've had a real inspiration from a woman who was woken up by the injustices around her and actually did something about it in a way that it's an inspiration to every single one of us as we face complicated and increasingly turbulent environmental, social, political challenges. We all need to lead with power. That's the bottom line. So Joy, thank you so much. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to hear from dehumanize, who's a polarity practitioner, and she's going to illuminate for us the power of the polarity paradigm in both understanding disease and in healing. So that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising, the polarity paradigm with dehumanize. Joy Gilfillan, thank you. We follow you and we support you, and we wish you well, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again here tomorrow, same time, same station.
It's a pleasure.
Bye for now.
Bye.